and welcome to Let Them Talk. I'm Paul DiRienzo, and Joan Musi is not here today with us. She's on an adventure of her own and might be calling in a little later, and we'll be looking for her call. In the meantime, we have a very interesting guest, one of the really experts in the field of drug reform in New York City and New York State, and that's Doug Greene, who's a drug war activist, co-founder of the organization Cures Not Wars, and generally an all-around expert on the policy choices and the laws that affect our freedoms when it comes to what people put in their own bodies and what the government is doing about it, and some of the alternatives that are being developed right now, such as medical marijuana and the Rockefeller drug laws. Of course, I think I mentioned, and we'll be talking more about that. So welcome, Doug.
Thank you for having me, Paul.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you here. And we are, by the way, live. And you can see our number, 212-757-1538. We're here to take your calls. If you have any questions about drug policy, this is the guy to ask. Also, one of the things we're doing while we're here is because there's going to be a film Thursday, day after tomorrow, June 14th. It's called Lockdown USA. And here's a poster. I like to put up the poster. Folks can take a look at it there. And it's going to be 6:30 to 9 p.m. at the Yippee Museum Cafe, which is located at 9 Bleecker Street, which is Bleecker between Bowery and Elizabeth, near where CBGB's used to be a long time ago. And
not that long ago.
Not that long ago. And Lockdown USA is being is going to also there's also going to be a discussion of the Rockefeller drug laws and of drug laws in New York. So we invite folks to come down there to 9 Bleecker Street on Thursday at 6:30 p.m. for a movie and a discussion about the drug laws in New York State. And we'll be talking more about this later on. So, Doug Greene, a lot of things happening. I wanted to talk to you about. You gave a great speech May 5th. I was very fascinated. You know, you were talking about the racial disparities in particular in the drug laws. And I want to talk about that a little later. First, there's some developments here in New York State as far as medical marijuana. And medical marijuana means that some states, starting in California and western states, and more it seems eastern states, are looking at the possibilities of providing an out for folks who really benefit from the use of marijuana: cancer patients, MS. I mean, the list goes on, and there's many famous people who've been speaking out. Montel Williams, for one, is a MS sufferer who's been out there in the forefront because he says pot helps him, you know. And although some are saying this sends a double message, it sends an unclear message to our youth. What do you think about that, Doug? Do you think that medical marijuana law is trying to give, sick people with terminal illness, with cancer, with MS, and different diseases that seem to, at least some people seem to benefit from using marijuana? Do you think this is sending a dangerous message to our children that marijuana is not totally evil?
Not at all, Paul. I think that's a real hypocrisy when you consider that we have so many opiate-based pain medicines like Vicodin and morphine, yet heroin is totally illegal for non-medical use.
Right.
Marijuana is a medicine for these people who can't be relieved by conventional prescription medicines.
Oh, I see what you're saying, that there's all these opiates that are available, that are Schedule II, that you can get a prescription for, and as long as you have that prescription, you can use them. And one thing we learned last week on the show was that more people are dying from overdosing on over-the-counter prescription opiates than they are from heroin these days, because there's a tremendous increase in the use of opiates. But at the same time, marijuana does not have any. You're not allowed to prescribe it, right?
No, you're not allowed to prescribe it anywhere. It is a Schedule I drug. It is considered by the federal government to have no medical use and a high potential for abuse, which sounds absurd, but that is the regulatory scheme that we're living under.
Right.
But what doctors can do in the states, there are currently 12 states that have recognized the medical use of marijuana. Connecticut and New York are poised hopefully to be the 13th and 14th, which would bring us to over 25% of the states, which I think is a great milestone. But in those states, doctors can recommend that patients use marijuana for certain conditions.
Now, even when a state, whether it be California, New Mexico, Arizona, or Connecticut or New York, creates this option of using medical marijuana for people who are sick, and allowing doctors basically to prescribe it.
It's
Still not legal.
Right, it's still not legal, and let's be very clear here. Doctors cannot prescribe it. They can recommend it. You can't write a prescription. You can write a letter saying that in your medical opinion that this patient would benefit from the use of marijuana.
What's the use of that if a person is arrested? If, like what happened to Barbara Jackson, who was a 70-plus-year-old grandmother who had colon cancer and had to go out on the streets of the South Bronx in order to buy marijuana, her medicine. She was arrested. She spent quite a number of hours in jail.
Right.
A number of those hours handcuffed, and then have the charges dropped. Well, a law like being considered that Governor Spitzer might sign. He's talking about he would sign such a law.
Oh well, no, he hasn't said that. What he said is he would consider it if the legislature.
He might.
He might.
He might.
He might.
There's a big difference in would and might.
Right. I mean, I had a conversation today with a legislative aide up in Albany, and it was pointed out to one of Governor Spitzer's staff that during the debate in July of last year, when there was a lightning round where Tom Suozzi and he were asked, do you support the use of medical marijuana? Tom Suozzi, who lost the primary to Governor Spitzer, said yes. And Eliot Spitzer, apparently on the recommendation of his brother, who I believe is a neurologist, said no. And as the aide pointed out, that was the only time he got booed.
That's when he said that.
Right.
Right, that's interesting. And so he seems to at least be considering the possibility of coming around.
Right. I mean, I think there's a lot of attention that's going on right now with the situation in Connecticut, which is, much further along than...
Both houses in the Connecticut legislature.
Right. The Connecticut House had passed it at some time, I believe, in May, and on June 1st, the Connecticut Senate followed, and the bill, according to the New York Times, as of Friday, the bill had not made it to Governor M. Jody Rel's desk, but once it does, she has 15 days to either sign it, or if she doesn't sign it, which is kind of a twist in Connecticut law, it would go into effect.
So that allows sort of a governor to not approve of something, not put their signature on it, but at the same time allow the public.
That's right, and actually kind of a similar thing happened in Vermont with Governor Jim Douglas, who also, like Jody Rell, is a Republican, and he had some reservations about the law, but he allowed it to go into effect without his signature.
I see. No, sort of like the opposite of a pocket veto, a pocket passage.
Yes, that's exactly right, Paul. However, in New York, it would be a pocket veto. In other words, if Governor Spitzer did nothing, the bill would die. Yes.
I see. He has to sign it.
He has to sign it. Yes, in New York,
the governor on that limb.
That's right.
I see. And why is it going out on a limb? Why is it? Why would going out giving sick people something that obviously helps them and that people are clamoring for, yet that there's so much clamoring that the state legislatures are going for it? What is the political downside for these politicians?
I don't think there really is a political downside, Paul, but I think a lot of politicians are still afraid of the drug warriors. Because the drug warriors, even though they are a minority, are very influential, very powerful, and very passionate about reforming drug policies from kind of a just say no first use model that doesn't recognize that any illicit drug has any medical value.
Right.
And plus, also the states are worried about the feds, because in California the DEA has raided a number of dispensaries, and there is still no protection.
And we've had Ed Rosenthal on this show, and he was just recently convicted. But as he
reconvicted.
As he told us, he doesn't face any jail time.
No, because he served one day, and the judge had said that the feds couldn't, seek any more time than that.
And he's, of course, a famous advisor to growers to the cannabis clubs in California on how to grow.
Right, to the city of Oakland.
Yeah, and he's an official government official. He's a government official in the city of Oakland, California.
Right, but he was not able to raise that in his defense at trial.
And he actually closed his defense without presenting an argument.
That's right.
You can't let us tell the truth here in front of the jury, so we're not going to say anything. And it was a partial victory. He was not convicted of everything. Right?
No, I think there.
It was a 50-50 type.
I think there were some counts he was not.
Right, the more serious ones he was not, I think.
I'm not sure.
All right, we'll have to have him on and talk about that more in detail. But it's a situation in California where a jury has convicted somebody, but at the same time they're not going to jail, and the status quo continues. And it's in this sort of war of words between the federal government and the state government there?
Well, it's more than a war of words, but
Why is that?
well, because the federal government is actually coming in and raiding dispensaries and cutting off access to patients. I mean, you know, it's 11 years on now, almost 11 years on, since 1996, which is when Prop 215 was passed in California, and yet there's still a lot of confusion in California. It's very much up to local governments to license dispensaries, and there are a lot of communities, especially inland, that will not license medical marijuana dispensaries. The city of San Diego is going to court. First they tried to go to federal court, then it was dismissed, and the federal court said, we don't, this is not a federal case, you have to go to state court. But the city of San Diego is trying to opt out of Prop 215 and enacting legislation. They do not want medical marijuana.
That's the first decrim law. That was the first law that sort of gave a positive defense for medical marijuana folks in California.
Right.
The one that was passed, the first one that started this whole movement, really.
Yes, was in California.
And it still survives, as we, but the federal government, as we said, is going after the dispensaries, going after people like Ed Rosenthal, trying to make the examples out of them. Is this a Republican Democratic thing, or is this something that there'll be a problem that, or I mean, it didn't seem like Bill Clinton really helped the situation too much when he was in.
No, I mean, not at all.
He fought it too, as well, right?
He fought it too. Marijuana arrests went up from George H.W. Bush to President Clinton. Marijuana arrests went up. And not only that, one of Bill Clinton's drug czars, General Barry McCaffrey, they were trying unsuccessfully to prosecute doctors for, as I pointed out earlier, not prescribing, but recommending marijuana. They were trying to take away doctors' DEA permits for recommending marijuana, and the Ninth Circuit said, no, that's unconstitutional.
So doctors are divided in a way, because you have doctors like some who think this is horrendous. There's no medical reason to allow people to smoke marijuana because they have chemotherapy, let's say, or MS or some of these other things. But at the same time, you have other doctors who go along with it.
Right. The medical community is not united on this issue. However, in New York, for example, the New York State Nurses Association is one of the groups that has endorsed Dick Gottfried's bill.
He's the assemblyman who's presented.
Right. He's the assemblyman from the Upper West Side who has been the champion of introducing medical marijuana bills in the assembly for a number of years.
Now. We're right in his district right now.
Yeah, that's right. I believe this is his district.
Right, Eminent Studios. He might be listening right now or watching,
or one of his staff members.
Absolutely. So, he's been doing that for a while. He's been pushing this bill for quite a long time.
Yes, he's been pushing this for a long time, and there was actually a lot of progress in 2005. A state senator, Republican state senator named Vincent Leibel from up in Putnam County, sponsored a bill in the Senate. But June of 2005 is, of course, when the Supreme Court came out with their decision in the Raich case. And at that point,
What was the Raich case?
Well, the Raich case was the case of Angel Raich and Diane Munson, who were two very ill women in California, and they had caregivers who were growing medical marijuana for them. And they went to court on a number of different claims, different theories of the case, to say that they were looking for injunctive relief against the federal government and the DEA from preventing them from their access to medical marijuana. And one of the grounds that the Supreme Court reached was the question of the Commerce Clause. How much power does Congress have over the Commerce Clause to make medical marijuana illegal? And the Supreme Court found that that was within Congress's authority under the Commerce Clause. And that really spooked a number of different...
They can regulate commerce within a state?
Right. Well, the theory of the Commerce Clause is very complicated, and I'm no constitutional scholar, but they basically said even growing marijuana for medicinal purposes could impact the overall marijuana market. So
the whole country. So
that's right. So that brought it within Congress's ambit.
It could raise or lower the price of marijuana in the whole country because they're growing more of it or less of it in one place.
Exactly, Paul. Right. So the Supreme Court came out.
That's why I'm not a lawyer.
Right.
I'm a teacher and a broadcaster, not a lawyer.
It's complex stuff. I was actually fortunate enough to attend the oral arguments at the Supreme Court for that case.
Oh, really?
Yes.
And what was that like?
It was pretty intense. I think Stephen Breyer was talking about nickel bags and kind of showed he was a little behind the times there talking about nickel bags, but it was a lot of fun.
Right, to see the 9 justices up there talking about marijuana.
Yeah,
in all its glory.
And that's
right?
and that's what
they
they
haven't admit any youthful dalliances.
No, certainly none of them was going to.
Not inhaling situations.
No one was going to.
No wild parties. I mean, all our presidents. It seems like the last few presidents had a pretty wild time of it back in the 70s.
Well, George W. has not. He just said he was young and indiscreet, and left at that.
Yes, very much so. I'm Paul DiRienzo. This is Let Them Talk. My guest, Doug Greene, who's really an expert on legislation, on drug reform and drug reform legislation, one of the founders of Cures Not Wars here in New York. And Joan Musi can't be with us today, our partner here on Let Them Talk, but she's in our hearts, and hopefully maybe you or her or someone who sees our number will call in and ask a question. We'll take your questions about the law and about medical marijuana and some of the other drugs that we'll be talking about. Doug, on May 5th at the rally where you spoke in Washington Square Park, you gave an impassioned description of exactly what goes on as far as the racial disparities in the drug laws here in New York State, particularly with the Rockefeller drug laws.
Right.
You run down some of those incredible facts that you had for us back then.
Well, one of the facts that I was giving was talking about the Rockefeller drug laws. Of the 14,000 plus Rockefeller drug law prisoners, about 91% of them are people of color, African American or Hispanic.
Would you say 91% of all the cocaine and heroin users in New York State are black or Hispanic?
Absolutely not.
No way, right?
No way.
Close. And I've heard it for young people, it's much higher. White people, quote unquote, have higher rates of use of heroin and cocaine at younger ages, actually.
I've
seen those statistics.
I've heard that too.
Right, but 91% of the people who go to jail. Now, what are the Rockefeller, why are they so onerous? What's the history of the Rockefeller drug laws?
The Rockefeller drug laws are mandatory minimum sentences that were enacted by Governor Nelson Rockefeller, hence the name,
Sure.
That were passed, I believe it was signed into law on May 8th, 1973. So we just passed the 34th anniversary of the Rockefeller drug laws. And I heard a great story, as you may know, Paul, on Sunday, it was Governor Eliot Spitzer's 48th birthday. And there was a rally outside his Midtown office on 3rd Avenue with a birthday cake for Governor Spitzer, asking him to, as a birthday present, to reform the Rockefeller drug laws. And there was a former Rockefeller drug law prisoner there who said that the laws actually went into effect, I think, on maybe October 1st, sometime in the fall of 1973. And he was at a Grateful Dead concert. And at midnight, the cops raided the concert. They were out to show that they meant business. And, the new mandatory minimum regime went into effect.
And what is the mandatory minimum is 15 years to life.
No, well, the mandatory minimums were 15 years to life. There were some minor reforms that were made to the laws by the legislature in 2004, 2005. And one of the changes that were made is that the laws went from being indeterminate sentences, like 15 years to life, to where now the maximum sentence under the Rockefeller drug laws is 8 to 20 years.
So they've actually reduced it somewhat, but they're still required, judges are still required to give sentences within, they can't depart as easily?
No.
Now there was a federal decision, in federal cases they're now allowed to depart. I know there was a Supreme Court decision that only affected federal cases?
Well, there's actually been a lot of action going on the question of federal cases. And there was a case called the Booker case and a companion case called Fan. And what that had to do was actually not with the mandatory minimums, but rather with the sentencing guidelines. And it basically said, the sentencing guidelines can't be strictly enforced. They're really of an advisory nature because a jury is not the one who's making the decision as to what the sentencing is. Now, there are still ramifications going through the federal court system. The Supreme Court has actually just agreed to hear another case dealing with a judge who departed from the sentencing guidelines.
They're a much more conservative court than they were when the last decision was made.
That's...
I mean, they've been...
That's true, but I think actually a lot of people on the court kind of have their own mind
on this issue.
On a lot of issues. If you look at what happened with greenhouse gases,
Okay.
They said the EPA has the authority to regulate greenhouse gases.
Right. So betting on how the Supreme Court will go is sort of like.
I think it's a fool's game.
Yeah, right. You
Betting
never
on the
know.
Supreme Court.
Right.
Yeah.
What 9 people will do is really up to them.
Right.
Well, let's talk a little bit more because, so who are some of the people? I mean, there's some fascinating stories of people who were actually arrested under the Rockefeller drug laws. What are some of these horrendous stories that of people who really were caught up in this law and wound up serving such large prison sentences?
Well, there's one story that's told in Lockdown USA, which we're going to be showing on Thursday night.
Right, Thursday night at 9 Bleecker Street, right? Here we go.
That's right.
And we'll talk about it again in a second. Go ahead.
There's a man named Darrell Best who was at a relative's house in the Bronx doing some repairs, and someone came to the house, a UPS or FedEx driver, and had a package. And he took the package, then he looks at the package and realizes the package is not addressed to him. He goes running out to try and catch the truck, and he's busted.
Really?
And he would not cop a plea.
Because he thought he was innocent. It wasn't his package.
It wasn't his package. It wasn't meant for him. And
he had it in his physical possession.
That's right.
And how many years in prison did he get?
He got 15 to life.
15 to life.
He got 15 to life.
And how long of that did he wind up serving? Did he ever get any?
I believe he is actually still serving his sentence right now, because he was offered a plea and he was considering doing it, but you know what he said? I'm not going to do it because he was innocent. And unfortunately, a lot of people who really are innocent can't prove it.
Right. Right, because as long as it's there, however it got there, it's there. And
right, because one of the key things, Paul, about the Rockefeller drug laws is that it's entirely based on the weight of the drug. How much of the drug you have has nothing to do with whether or not this is your first offense, what your role is in the transaction. A lot of these cases, it's often minority women who are, asked by their husband or boyfriend, hey, take this package. And they're
caught with the package.
They're caught with the package.
The boyfriend goes scot-free, and the woman gets 15 years to life.
Right.
Right. That's an amazing.
Right.
And what is the reason? How come these laws have been so hard to change? I mean, it's like pulling teeth. I mean, there's been so many movements. I mean, there's small reforms. But as you said, 1973, these laws were passed. The reforms, 2004, 2006, 30 years later. 2004
and 2005, actually. And these were very minor reforms that really did not restore judicial discretion to sentencing judges.
Why is it so hard? Well, what is the argument that the defenders of this system use? I mean, don't they see these inequalities and injustices?
Well, unfortunately, these inequalities and injustices often benefit some of the strongest defenders of the laws. The New York State District Attorneys Association, despite the example of some courageous people like Albany County District Attorney David Soares, who was actually won election campaigning against the Rockefeller drug laws. But
Albany.
In Albany County, but also Republican state senators from upstate. A lot of these people, especially people who are on the Criminal Victims and Correction Committee, which has jurisdiction over these laws, these people are from upstate districts that prisons are their economic lifeblood. Right. If it was not for prisons that house these prisoners, who are mostly from 7 minority neighborhoods in the outer boroughs of New York City, there would be nothing going on economically.
Right. Wow. Wow. What's happening? It looks like we're off the air. What happened there?
8:23.
Right. It just went off. Well, we're going to try and get back on the screen right now, and I assume we're just having a minor technical glitch, and hopefully we will be back on the screen momentarily. There we go. Thank you very much, Tech Group. And so we have a few more minutes. Doug Greene, we're speaking with Doug Greene. My name is Paul DeRienzo. This is Let Them Talk. Joan Moosey's not with us this week. She'll be back soon to help co-host the show, and she's with us in her heart. And we're talking about the Rockefeller drug laws and medical marijuana before that, and particularly this film. What is this film, Lockdown, which is going to be at the Yippee Museum Cafe, 9 Bleecker Street, which is by Bleecker and Bowery, by where CB's used to be, CBGB's, if you know where that is. You can take the number 6 train to Bleecker Street Station or the F train to Broadway Lafayette.
I think the BD&F.
BD&F.
I'll go to Broadway Lafayette.
And it's just right there on the front door, and there's no buzzer or anything. The door will be right open. And what is this movie Lockdown USA about?
Lockdown USA is a documentary about the long-standing efforts to reform the Rockefeller drug laws, and it's partially about the story of Darryl Best, who we were talking about earlier,
sure.
As well as the story of a rather unlikely...
Who refused to plead guilty to a crime he feels he did not commit, and in return got 15 years in prison.
Right. As well as the story of rather unlikely celebrity activists, namely Russell Simmons, who devoted a lot of effort in the summer of 2004 to reforming the Rockefeller drug laws and kind of got into some trouble.
Why is that? What kind of trouble?
The New York State Temporary Commission on Lobbying tried to charge him with, not filing the requisite papers for, lobbying for reforming the Rockefeller drug laws. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
So, and did he file those papers? He's probably rich enough to have a
No, he didn't file those papers, but there was a question about whether he was actually lobbying for specific legislation,
or generally lobbying.
Right, to raise awareness of the issue.
Right. So, wow, that to me that all reflects the fact that there's such a tremendous opposition there to reforming these laws, and it's really sad that we have that in our society. We have a minute to go, Doug Greene. Tell us what can people out there do? What is it possible? What's possible right now?
Well, I think what's possible is real reform of the Rockefeller drug laws in the next week. We need to let Senate Majority Leader Bruno and Governor Spitzer know that we need real reform of the Rockefeller drug laws now. We can't wait another year until the laws are 35 years old. And I think we also have a good shot at getting medical marijuana to Governor Spitzer's desk. So that's another area where people need to contact their state senators and to contact Governor Spitzer and let them know how they feel about allowing sick and dying people to use marijuana medicinally.
Very good. And again, Lockdown will be at the Yippee Museum Cafe, 9 Bleecker Street. And we'll be back next week with an interesting show. So thanks for joining us here on Let Them Talk. And thanks a lot, Doug, for really enlightening us about this complex and very difficult question in our time of drug reform. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me, Paul.
All right, great. And thank you, listeners. I guess we're getting a few seconds overtime, maybe making up for the fact that we lost a few seconds.
That's right. I should also mention that at the end of the evening on Thursday, we're going to have a special stand-up comedy performance by Randy Credico, who's the executive director of the William Moses Kunstler Fund for Racial Justice.
That's great.
So that'll be a nice way to end the evening.
Oh, great. Right. Randy gave a speech, gave a wonderful comedic, he's a comedian politico rolled into one. He gives a speech, but it's a funny speech. And
that's right.
You learn something from it, but you're also entertained by it, and I think he's
right. I think it'll be a really nice way to end the evening.
And of course, William Moses Kunstler. William Kunstler was the great attorney, passed away a few years ago, who was really in the forefront of all kinds of interesting, being really sort of the lawyer of the last resort, the lawyer of the damned, and for folks who might find themselves in prison for 15 years. Trying to return a package that wasn't really addressed to them, as we talked about earlier. Well, we're still here. I have to thank the folks downstairs for letting us have a few extra minutes. Let's take advantage of that time and maybe talk about. Let's go back to medical marijuana. How many states now have legalized or have some way made some allowance for people to use medical?
Right now it's 12. New Mexico became 12 earlier this
How about
spring.
the presidential candidates? Are any of them speaking out on this issue?
Well, Bill Richardson, of course, is the governor of New Mexico, has an excellent record on drug policy reform. Of course, he signed a medical marijuana bill into law earlier this year.
Really?
And he's also done some great stuff on the topic that you had last week, which was preventing overdose and implementing a Good Samaritan exception. I think we're off.
There we go.
Yeah.
Great.